Is it time to be concerned about the New Jersey Devils? I don't think you want to hear just my thoughts. So I asked a question on Twitter and you guys responded. So I'm going to respond to some of your guys' concerns on today's episode of Locked On Devils. There's a lot to discuss, obviously. Buckle up.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. So a couple days ago, during the course of the New Jersey Devils' 5-1 loss to the New York Islanders, I put out a tweet asking if it was time to be somewhat concerned for the Devils because, let's face it, in that game against the Islanders, their defense, primarily Ryan Graves, got exposed big time, and Andre Palat, he added insult to injury by having a turnover in the defensive end for the Devils. So basically, people were just putting it into the light that the Devils' defense and their overall execution in their own end hasn't been the best the last few weeks. But luckily, they're able to score a lot of goals, and they still somehow, some way, find a way to squeak out a victory more times than not. So that way, it gets swept underneath the rug. So going back to my tweet, my Twitter feed was bombarded with your guys' replies. So you guys put down your concerns. Some of you agreed, some of you disagreed, and you guys were basically sparking this huge debate. And I was like, this tweet is too important to not make it a full-fledged episode. So I talked about in the previous episode during my game recap that I was going to make it into a full-fledged episode. And depending on how well this episode does, I might have to do part two because, like I said, you guys showed a lot of love to that tweet, and my Twitter feed was just full of your guys' responses. So I narrowed it down into a couple concerns that was basically uniform amongst the fan base. So we're going to talk about Lindy Ruff. Is he the problem? I'm going to give you guys my perspective on it. Some of you have expressed concerns with how some of the personnel have been utilized, primarily with Timo Meier, because let's face it, Timo Meier's had a good game here and there, but I think people are just expecting a little bit more from him. And then in the third and final segment, I'm going to talk briefly about the defense once again, because I think I touched on it plenty in the previous episode. And then I'm going to give you guys my response as to is it time for everyone to basically have these concerns for Devils? Because let's face it, that loss to the New York Islanders, it was a bit of an eye-opener, especially since the Devils have a big game on Thursday at Madison Square Garden against the New York Rangers. Because if the season were to end right now and the playoffs were to start, the New Jersey Devils would be taking on the New York Rangers in the first round. And depending on how they do, then they would have to either play the Carolina Hurricanes or the New York Islanders. But a lot of you are hoping that the New Jersey Devils get the first seed in the Metro, so that way they can just play the New York Islanders or the Pittsburgh Penguins, depending on how these last few games shake out. But ultimately, we're going to talk about the concerns that you guys brought up for the New Jersey Devils. So the first being, is Lindy Ruff the problem for the New Jersey Devils? Now, before I talk about the good for Lindy Ruff, let's talk about some of the things that you guys were just basically putting out there. You guys were saying that you didn't like the overall line combinations. A couple games, Lindy Ruff has been rolling with 11-7 in terms of the line combination. So 11 forwards, but getting an extra defenseman. Some of you would prefer 12 and 6, so 12 forwards and 6 defensemen. So here's my response to that. I wouldn't have a problem with the 11 forwards and the 7 defensemen, depending on who's out there on the rink. So what do I mean by that? Well, I have a problem with it primarily because you're getting Kevin Ball out there, and yes, he's playing more consistently, but who's still out there on the rink? It's Brendan Smith. So my thing is, like, why is Brendan Smith continuing to play? I've touched on it for a couple episodes, and quite honestly, look, I know he brings a lot of veteran leadership. He seems to be beloved within the locker room, but the results are there. I think Kevin Ball deserves to be that 6th or final defenseman for the Devils, and then you stop making Jesper Boquist a healthy scratch. So forgive me, I'm not trying to act like I know more than Lindy Ruff, but that's just my 2-cent opinion when it comes to how the line combinations are rolling out. And yes, they flip-flop time to time, but Amanda Stein released a tweet, I believe it was like a week or two ago. She basically said, like, when it comes to line combinations, just because you play on a certain line, it doesn't mean you're going to get the most or the least amount of ice time. And I get where she's coming from. So I think she is right in that sense, which is It doesn't matter if Jesper Bratt's playing on the third line. I still think he's going to get the most or one of the most ice times amongst the Devils forwards because he is that good. So I would just say let's not be so dramatic when it comes to the lines flipping. Obviously, I would like to see more consistency, but as long as we're just trying to figure out a way where we're utilizing all our weapons in an appropriate manner, then by all means, like just try to find what works, but it really has to stop come playoff time unless you drastically need to make some changes. And I said it in a past episode, which is Lindy Ruff, the team is winning consistently. You don't need to fix what's not broken. So that's my thing, which is I get that the Devils are still finding ways to get points on the board, but my thing is like, can we just find a little bit more consistency? So going back to the 11-7, 11 forwards and 7 defensemen, if Luke Hughes or Shimon Nemeth were on the team right now and you want to use that extra defenseman role to give them a chance, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the facts are simply there, which is I think Jesper Boquist has earned his playing time, and I think he deserves to be in the lineup more often as of late, instead of using him as a healthy scratch in order to get Brendan Smith out onto the rink. Now, I do want to give credit where credit is rightfully earned, because Lindy Ruff did actually make a smart move, at least for the first half of the year, by putting Erik Haula on the same line as Jack Hughes. So a lot of people, including myself, I'm not going to act like I knew about it since the beginning, but a lot of people were like wondering, why is Erik Haula continuing to play on the same line as Jack Hughes? Like, why is Erik Haula getting this big of a role? Why isn't he a bottom 6 player? What's going on? So basically, during my time at the Prudential Center, Amanda Stein did ask, why was Fabian Zetterlund a healthy scratch for a game? And Lindy Ruff gave his answer saying, like, look, players need to earn their playing time. And unfortunately, we weren't getting it from Fabian Zetterlund. So he was scratched for the game. Then James Nichols followed and asked Lindy Ruff, okay, then why is that the case for Fabian Zetterlund, but not Erik Haula? And basically, Lindy Ruff gave us a unique perspective, which was, look, when it comes to Erik Haula, he wins the faceoffs, he does the dirty work, and he's setting up Jack Hughes quite nicely. So here's something that I want you guys to consider. Remember just a few episodes ago, I was talking about the struggles for Jack Hughes because he only had 2 goals in his last 17 games. I'm not saying this is the only factor, but keep in mind, Erik Haula hasn't really been playing on the same line as Jack Hughes, or at least to start out the game. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying it's the sole reason, but it's not something that we can just glance over. It's not something you could just ignore. So earlier in the season, Jack Hughes was going on a tear points-wise. Even if the Devils came out on the losing end, he was still getting his numbers. Obviously, he was the only representative at the All-Star game for the New Jersey Devils. So I think Erik Haula, and I've said it on the show before when Lindy Ruff gave that perspective and I looked at it closely, I'd say you would have to credit a good amount of Jack Hughes' success to Erik Haula, because once again, Erik Haula can do the dirty work. He can win the faceoff, so that way Jack Hughes doesn't have to do it, and Jack Hughes can focus solely on Jack Hughes and himself. So Lindy Ruff was smart in that way. So do I agree with the constant lineup changes for Lindy Ruff? Not exactly. Do I agree with the 11-7 as opposed to the 12-6 when it comes to rolling out with the lineups? Not really either. Just depends on who's out there. But my thing is simply this. I think Lindy Ruff has done a pretty good job of utilizing all the weapons that he's been given, because you got Jack Hughes. He was an all-star this year. Jesper Bratt has taken a couple steps forward. Nico Hischier, he seems to be putting the NHL world on notice as to why he's probably one of the more underrated players throughout the league. And Dougie Hamilton, he's having a big year on the offensive side of things as well, because Dougie Hamilton just broke Scott Stevens' record for most goals in a single season by a Devils defenseman. So I don't want that to get overlooked either. And while we're on that discussion, success for the Devils, in my eyes, doesn't happen without good coaching. So someone was bringing up the fact saying that the Devils have a lot of talent, but their coaching staff sucks. And that's why, and they're basically just coaching themselves or whatever the case might be. I don't think that's entirely true. If that was the case, then we would see Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Dougie Hamilton. We would see them doing their things. However, I think the Devils would still be a bottom tier team in the league if they didn't have good coaching, because I've seen it in hockey. I've seen it throughout all sports, which is despite having talent on a team, if you're not well coached, you're not really going to be geared up for success. So I think Lindy Ruff does deserve a decent amount of credit as to what he's been doing with the roster and getting the most out of some of his players like Jack Hughes, like Nico Hischier, like Jesper Bratt, and like Dougie Hamilton. And look, guys, 13-game win streaks don't just happen out of thin air. I know I rely on that a lot, but it's so true. Yes, they weren't able to break their own franchise record, but the facts are still there. The Devils went on that 13-game win streak, and that doesn't happen too often. So look at the Florida Panthers, for example. They were well coached, first by Joel Quenneville, and then Andrew Burnett had to take over after that Chicago Blackhawks scandal that involved Quenneville. And then what happened? The Florida Panthers became President's Trophy winners. And now look what happened this year. I know they made some changes to the roster, and I'm not the host of Locked On Panthers, but I was able to reach out to Armando because I asked him, like, what's going on with the Panthers? And he basically told me, like, look, one of the factors was not good coaching. So I want you to keep that in mind. The Florida Panthers, they were President's Trophy winners just last season. And now I think if they're not mathematically eliminated from playoff contention right now, they're fairly close to it. So just putting that out there, one of the factors as to why the Panthers haven't been repeating their success compared to last year was not good coaching. So I think that's some food for thought. And I think Lindy Ruff has done a pretty good job. And I was like, if you give him a chance in a non-COVID strict season, and if most of his players stay healthy, I think you're going to see a much better Devils team. So is Lindy Ruff the problem? No. And look, I know I sometimes complain about Lindy Ruff. I'm not going to say I agree with 100% of the things he does, but I think he's done a pretty good damn job of leading the Devils to success. So is he the problem? I'm going to say no, but obviously, like I said, doesn't mean I agree with everything he does, but I don't think he deserves a fair share of this blame. So I don't know what more you want from Lindy Ruff, because quite honestly, it's just like the Devils are going back to the playoffs. They have a good record, and they're still within striking distance of that first seed in the Metro. And yes, we have the players, we have the personnel, but I think coaching deserves a lot of credit. Okay, the second concern that I think a lot of people have was that the Devils have a lot of talent, but it's just not meshing together for the time being. And I think the primary reason is probably the addition of Timo Meier. So I saw a tweet lingering around, and basically this person was comparing Timo Meier's stats from this year with the San Jose Sharks and comparing it to his time currently with the Devils. And I'm just like, look, guys, it's a small sample size as to what Timo Meier is capable of doing. So far, he has played in 13 games for the Devils. He has 4 goals, 2 assists for a grand total of 6 points, and he has a plus minus of -4, and he has spent 12 minutes in the penalty box. So my thing is simply this. If Timo Meier is able to figure it out come the end of the year and is able to practice maybe just a bit more, and he's able to pick it up come playoff time, then I think people are going to start to realize why the New Jersey Devils got him in the first place. So when you're buying, like I said, you're buying because you want to see success come the postseason, or you're competing for a playoff position. When we got Timo Meier, the Devils were already in a pretty good spot to clinch a playoff berth. And now that they've already done so, they have their eyes set on the playoffs. Like, it would be nice to be the first seed in the Metropolitan Division. It would be great and all, but I think people are just trying to avoid the New York Rangers in my eyes. They'd rather play the New York Islanders. But I think we've seen more success against the Rangers this year compared to the Islanders, quite honestly, because we've lost twice to the Islanders this year in pretty embarrassing fashion before the trade deadline and after the trade deadline. But digressing a little bit, what I'm just trying to say, guys, is that I hope that Timo Meier just picks it up come playoff time. I'm not concerned for him, and quite honestly, this was maybe bound to happen, which is he's a new addition, and obviously he's trying to figure things out. He's trying to get used to a new system. He's trying to get used to new line mates. He's trying to form that overall chemistry. And some of these guys have built up the chemistry over the summer, during training camp, during the course of preseason. Timo Meier was just thrusted into the fire, and now he has to figure it out, and he has to try to find a way to pick it up. So I just want you guys to remember, like, when teams usually buy, and for a team like the Devils, it's kind of uncharted territory for them, because for the past few years, the Devils have been used to being like sellers, or maybe just not really being in a position to buy or sell, or just get rid of contracts, whatever the case might be. So this is kind of uncharted territory for a lot of the players on the roster. And obviously you got people like Andre Palat and Eric Holub, who've been to the playoffs before, but at the end of the day, they're still relatively new to the team as well. So this is just a new experience for the Devils, and it's a new experience for the Devils fan base. So it's been a while since the Devils have been buyers. And now I think for Timo Meier, it's just like, even if this first year doesn't go too well, I think come next year, if Timo Meier, let me put it this way, if Timo Meier is struggling come midseason, and if he signs his extension with the Devils over summer, which I presume he'll do, if he is struggling come midseason next year, then that's when you could be a little concerned. But for right now, it's just like the position that he's been thrusted into, it's going to take some time. And it's a good thing that the Devils still have a decent amount of games remaining. So maybe he can figure it out, more practice time, and just try to form that chemistry. It's easier said than done, guys. And obviously, Lindy Ruff moving him from line to line doesn't really help him. But like Amanda Stein alluded to, sometimes being on a certain line doesn't mean you're going to play the most minutes or the least amount of minutes. It's just a matter of like putting you at the right position to possibly succeed. So the structure for the Devils, in my eyes, look, guys, the Devils have exceeded expectations. So, and I'm going to talk about it in the third segment. I think with the personnel that they have, it has a lot of great potential. So going back to Amanda Stein, when she appeared on the show just recently, she said that compared to the Taylor Hall-led team, she thinks this team has a lot of potential to succeed. Just because, and she said it's not a knock at Taylor Hall, but think about it. Nico Hischier, he's still young. Jack Hughes, he's still young. Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, and Dougie Hamilton. So our core pieces are right there for us. And also you can consider Vitek Vanecek. So sign long-term, Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Dougie Hamilton, John Marino, Jonas Siegenthaler. So basically the core for Devils is signed long-term. So even if they don't reach like a certain part of the playoffs that people are satisfied with this year, they could still run it back come next year or the year after. So this team still has a lot of time to find success, even if it's not for this season. I think they've just expedited the rebuild process, and now they've turned into a legitimate playoff team. Now, how deep they go in the playoffs, we're just going to have to wait and see. But before we talk about the my thoughts in general, let's just look at the past schedule for the Devils. So when looking at that Islanders game, it was 5-1. I said in the previous episode that the scoreboard didn't really do them justice. Two of the five goals scored by the Islanders were empty netter goals. And then when looking at that game against the Senators, Devils got off to a slow start. They let the Senators hang around, but at the end of the day, the Devils were able to come away with an exciting 5-3 victory. Then when looking at that Buffalo Sabres game, that was an absolute nightmare. I don't know what happened to the Devils. I don't know why they allowed the Sabres to score 5 goals, because quite honestly, the Sabres, didn't they lose 7-3 against Nashville in their previous game before playing the Devils? That Minnesota Wild game, bad luck for Jack Hughes, but sent it into OT, and unfortunately just it was just bad circumstance. The Devils were able to come away with the 5-2 victory against the Lightning. Devils let the Panthers score 4 unanswered goals, losing in a shootout to the Lightning 4-3, 4-1 loss to the Devils. They had a chance to put their foot on the gas pedal, but they didn't. Impressive 3-0 shutout victory for the Devils against the Hurricanes, 3-1 victory against the Canadiens, shootout victory against the Washington Capitals 3-2. So I'm just going back at the last few weeks for the Devils, and were some of those games their best outing? No. And yes, there's some questions going into the playoffs, and we'll talk about it in a future episode. But I think for right now, yes, some things are getting exposed, but I'd rather them get exposed right now compared to the playoffs. And I think a lot of Devils journalists have touched on, I think Ryan Novozinski did an article about it. James Nichols, he was on the show a few days ago to discuss his thoughts on like what the Devils have been doing the last few weeks. So I'd rather for the Devils to be struggling right now than becoming playoff time. And quite honestly, their worst is still better than most people's best. So to wrap up this show, I'm going to give you guys my final thoughts. I'm going to talk about something I discussed in the previous episode, and then I will talk about if I'm concerned or not. But before I do, I want you guys to make some extra money, so I want you to head over to FanDuel. So the tournament is heating up, and there's no better place to get in the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And all you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net, all on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. I think this Final Four is going to be a complete letdown. It's the story of the underdogs. Exciting, but I burned my bracket, to be honest. So don't miss your shot at no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Okay, so here are my concerns for the Devils. It starts with their defense because it's something I talked about during the course of last season as well, because I said the Devils, they can score 5 to 7 goals more frequently than the average team. And I saw glimpses of that at the end of December of last year, so the 2021-2022 season, because that's when Jack Hughes returned from injury. He was player of the week at one point. Devils were having some exciting victories. Seemed like Jack Hughes was going to try to salvage what he could of the season because the Devils were pretty much far gone at that point. But still, it was just like, I see the offense, but it doesn't matter if the Devils allow like if they score 5, it doesn't matter if you allow 6 goals. So the offense, unfortunately, as impressive as it is, it gets underrated just because of the poor defense for the Devils. So that's the thing that the Devils need to work on. And if that Islanders game was any indication, it really needs to tighten up. And like Bruce Driver said when he was on the show just a month ago, the Devils, when it comes to defense, is so vital to success because Bruce Driver's 1995 Stanley Cup team going into the playoffs, they were heavily underdogs, but they were able to run that trap defense. And then come the 1995 Stanley Cup finals, they were able to upset the favored Detroit Red Wings. So the Devils can be in that same situation, which is defense is going to win you games. So I know sometimes you're going to get goalied. You're going to run into hot goaltending. That happens, but that can't be an excuse anymore. If you're not going to win with offense, you got to win with defense. And unfortunately, the Devils weren't able to do that in the previous game against the New York Islanders. Now, here's the thing, like, just take away some of the blunders made by Ryan Graves and also Andre Palat. It's a brand new game, and those empty netter goals don't happen. So 5 minus 3 is 2, and then you take away those 2 empty netter goals because they don't happen. Devils win 1-0. I know it's overstepping a little bit, but I'm just giving you guys that example. So my expectations for Devils come playoffs is just like, here's the thing. Here's something else I was seeing on my Twitter feed when I tweeted that tweet out. I saw a few people say, like, look, the Devils are young. We should be happy that they're in this position right now. And I get that a lot of people want the Devils to be hoisting the Stanley Cup at the end. They have big expectations, and basically everyone's excited for playoff hockey to be happening in New Jersey once again. But the fact of the matter is, those people who commented that underneath the tweet, they're absolutely right, guys. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. What were your expectations going into the year? My expectations were wild card team, fringe playoff team, somewhere in that ballpark. And I said if all went well for the Devils, they could make the playoffs. And now here they are about to go back to the playoffs. And I really hope they are able to get that first seed for the Carolina Hurricanes, not because I want to avoid the Rangers, it's because I want the Devils to basically have a statement saying we can be the best team or one of the best teams in the NHL. And I think that's going to gear them up come next year or the year after. So my thing is, come playoff, if the Devils were to lose in the first round, I would be very disappointed. Yes. But at the same time, I would think back, reflect, and just be like, they got to the playoffs when no one anticipated for them to get to that point. So I'm not trying to underestimate the Devils. I'm not trying to basically doubt on my team, but I'm just looking at the bigger picture here, which is the Devils are going back to the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. And that's really exciting. So I want people to remember, like, this team has accomplished a lot this year. And yes, the last few games, they could have gone better. Absolutely. But let's just not forget what's more important here. And also, like I said, this Devils team is geared up for success. You don't believe me? Just ask Amanda Stein. Now, when looking at this Rangers game, I talk about challenges for the Devils. This is going to be a huge challenge for them because according to Molly Walker, who covers the New York Rangers for the New York Post, she was able to speak with Patrick Kane, and here's what Patrick Kane had to say about the tight race between the Rangers and the Devils. He said, listen, Madison Square Garden is an amazing place to play. I think it's a big advantage to have home ice. We have that in front of us now. If we do what we need to do, it'll be a big game coming up. Amanda Stein responded to that tweet by saying, Rangers just now 2 points behind the Devils after their win tonight, making Thursday's matchup vitally important. So once again, the Devils are just 3 points behind the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes have lost their last 2 games. Rangers are on a 3-game win streak. So basically, first place in the Metropolitan Division is up for grabs, and there's still a decent amount of games left to basically shake things up. I would like the Devils to get that first place position because, like I said, I want them to make a statement throughout the league, not because I want them to avoid the Rangers. So is it time to be concerned for the Devils? I'm sure every team has their concern. And yes, I think some of their concerns need to be brought into a bigger light. Like for Lindy Ruff, the defense is atrocious. You got to fix it. You got to tighten it up. The power play is mediocre, and we have too many weapons on the team for it to be that bad or mediocre, whatever word you want to use. And basically, am I concerned for the Devils? I think every team has its concern, and I certainly have my concerns. But at the same time, the one thing I'm just trying to do, keep expectations moderate. So that way, don't get too high, don't get too low. But at the same time, I'm just like, yeah, certain things can be better. And it's definitely just a red flag going into the postseason. And quite honestly, I think we're going to do another episode discussing it. So in my eyes, yes, time to be concerned a little bit. But at the same time, it's not panic mode. But there's definitely some issues that the Devils need to work out before the playoffs if they want any chance of success. Because if they don't get their defense together, if they don't get their special teams together, at least for the power play, they're going to be a first-round exit with ease. So this game against the Rangers, it's a true challenge for them. Okay, the Rangers are on a 3-game win streak. And remember, the Metro is very tight, and you're going into enemy territory. Can you snap the Rangers' modest 3-game win streak and then try to get yourself within striking distance of first place in the Metro? So who would be a better challenge? Would it be the Islanders or would it be the Rangers? I mean, we haven't played the Rangers post-trade deadline, and the Islanders pre-trade deadline and post-trade deadline have given us some issues. So we're going to have to wait and see because we've won more against the New York Rangers, obviously. So let me know what you guys think. Are you concerned for the Devils? And who would you like to see the Devils play in the first round? As for today's episode, that's about all the time I have for you. So like I said, depending on how well this episode does, I might have to do a part 2 of reading your guys' concerns for the Devils and discuss it on the show. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. Hit me up on my personal Twitter page at TreyMatt4 or the show's Twitter page at Locked On Devils. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.